Welcome to Read Poems Every Day. Today is July 4th, 2026, and I thought, given that it's Independence Day in the United States, it might be a good day to think about and look at Walt Whitman's I Hear America Singing. I have no doubt I read this in grade school or high school or in college, but I don't read a lot of Walt Whitman. I don't teach a lot of American literature courses. It has to have been over 20 years since I've read this poem. So by all accounts, it's in that sense new to me. So I thought, let's read it aloud and let's see if my process of getting to know a poem can apply to something like Whitman's poem. Sorry, I'm just kind of bracing myself here. Okay. I also am realizing I don't have my beans spelled out there, though I did spell contexts correctly this time. Here it is. I Hear America Singing by Walt Whitman. I hear America singing. The varied carols I hear, those of mechanics, each one singing his, as it should be, blithe and strong. The carpenter singing his, as he measures his plank or beam. The mason singing his, as he makes ready for work or leaves off work. The boatman singing what belongs to him in his boat. The deckhand singing on the steamboat deck. The shoemaker singing as he sits on his bench. The hatter singing as he stands. The woodcutter's song. The ploughboy's on his way in the morning, or at noon intermission, or at sundown. The delicious singing of the mother, or of the young wife at work, or of the girl sewing or washing. Each singing what belongs to him or her, and to none else. The day, what belongs to the day. At night, the party of young fellows, robust, friendly, singing with open mouths their strong, melodious songs. I Hear America Singing. Okay. Let's count some beans. It's sometimes a little tricky to count Walt Whitman's lines because they are so long. I've miscounted them before because sometimes the edition I'm using makes it look as if a line that spills over from one line on the page to another line are two separate lines. So even in the attempt to describe that, I realize what I'm saying is maybe confusing. Um, and anyway, reading Whitman, counting his lines, often forces us to learn the lesson that counting lines in a poem is not the same thing as counting how many physical lines are being taken up on any given page. So, for instance, if I counted how many lines are here just on this web page, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Except this is one line. So you see how this is indented here. If I kept, actually, no. No, if I keep blowing out, it does not keep going. That's something to do with the formatting of the page. But you'll see if I blow it up even more, that's all held together as one line. And so it starts to indent it all together. So on the steamboat deck is not its own line. When I zoom in, you see how singing is added to that line. Okay, I don't know if that made any sense. All this is to say that these indented spaces here are not separate lines, they're part of the previous line, which teaches us something about how long Whitman's lines can get. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's an 11 line poem. 11 lines. It's only one stanza. Another way of saying there are no stanzas, it's just one stanza. Lines vary considerably in length. Of course, this is what's called free verse, meaning unmetered poetry. You heard it as I read that Whitman writes in such a way that if you're used to kind of the metered tempo, I don't know if that's the right word, rhythm, let's say sonic organization of lyric poetry, Whitman writes in a way that kind of disrupts it and in a sort of pulling you in two directions between reading prose and reading metered poetry. That isn't to say there aren't sort of poetic distributions of emphasis. That's another way to maybe think about meter, that you have stressed and unstressed beats organized in something like a Shakespeare sonnet into what we call iambic pentameter. You don't have something that um, I almost said rigid. I don't mean that in a negative way. Let's say uniform. You don't have anything that uniform in Whitman's poem, but you might, if you read through it, find a kind of rhythm of stresses as you work through it. I'm not going to do that in this video, but this is just to say if that's something you're into, I would highly encourage you experiment with that, sort of see what kind of rhythms of stresses organize or help shape our experience of it. All right, 11 lines, one stanza, lines vary considerably in length. Enjambment. I am guessing there's probably no enjambment in this poem, and I think I am correct about that. Let's blow this up just a little bit and look at the ends of these lines. Comma, 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 comma. Yes. Comma, 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 comma. Yeah, so zero instances of enjambment. All lines end in commas or a period. So at the very end of the poem, of course, uh, Whitman puts a period, and that's the only period in the poem. So let's think about punctuation a bit. I'll try to spell it correctly this time. Uh, a lot of commas. Um, some lines have several commas. Maybe severals have a few, so maybe several is too many. We have a dash in line 10. The day, what belongs today, at night. And that dash kind of, in some sense, yeah, skips ahead to a time that's sometimes represented in the rest of the poem, but maybe not. We do have a reference to sundown here, but that's a little different than nighttime. So there's a way in which the rest of the poem is sort of describing a work day, and here we have a fast forwarding or in film what we might call a jump cut to a later moment in the songs that Whitman hears, the speaker hears. A lot of commas, dashes, then a period at the end of line 11. But that's it. Oh no, there are some apostrophes, but usually indicating they're possessive apostrophes. So woodcutters, plowboys, um, in line one, two, three, four, five, six. In line, I think that's line 7. But that might be it, even in terms of apostrophes. I think so. Yeah. So a lot of commas. We'll come back to that maybe, thinking about how the distribution of commas becomes an important strategy that Whitman probably deploys to help control our reading. Even that first line, which has a powerful caesura right in the middle of it, I hear America singing, the varied carols I hear. Maybe we'll come back to that opening line, but it's split, that comma splits it in half, gives you a hard pause right in the middle. And then you have the repetition of hear at the very beginning, at the very end of I hear, at the very beginning, at the very end of the line, which sort of folds in on itself and then leads into all the examples of the carols that the poem then inventories for us. Okay. Are there pronouns here? Let's take a look. There is, of course, the I in line 1. Line 1. We have an it, and I think that's referring to the mechanics carol. Line 2. Of course, we have a his and him. There's several of them, so I'll just put passum. There's lots of instances of his and him throughout here. Let's just add he to that. I'm not sure there's as many instances of he, but we'll put that in there. There is a her. That's in line, first time in line 9. The first time women are referenced in line 8. There's no feminine pronoun there, but there is in line 9. Then there's a there, which seems an important shift in the poem after all. Okay. So what can we take from this? The speaker is positioned as a kind of point of departure. The poem does inventory a kind of experience, though it is more a work of imagination or an aggregate of experience than a single, say memory or scene. Right. So there's a way in which Whitman's I positions himself to kind of hear everything all at once. But of course, the speaker isn't simultaneously hearing the mechanics and the carpenter and the mason and the boatman and the women and the wives and the daughters. Whitman is either aggregating a bunch of experience he's had, the speaker is aggregating that experience, or the speaker is imagining and sort of projecting out a vision, a vision of the sort of assemblage of carols that make up, as he says in the first line, quote, America singing. Okay. The speaker. And so how I get there is just paying attention to where the I is. The I is right in the beginning of the poem and nowhere else. So Whitman makes the inventory the emphasis of the poem, right? The hymns and hers are the true subject of the poem. The doers, the actors in their own separate scenes. Okay, so there's that. Lots of commas. I've already kind of talked a bit about that. What else can we notice? So I think, the hers occupy, probably unsurprisingly, a less prominent position, though they are present. The domestic space is, arguably not in a position, not in an inferior position, but is set next to all of the other carols examples. Right. So what am I saying there? So it does seem important that the mother, the young wife, the girl are the last example in this inventory. We have mechanics, carpenter, mason, boatman. It seems important that they're the last one, and that the her indicated here is referring just to one line, but in line 10 the him or her is offered as if it's taking up a kind of equal number of examples, um, even though in the execution of the poem that's not quite true. I might just be babbling. I hope people are seeing what I help are sort of following my train of thought here, or my ramble, as it were. This sort of inspired by the low frequency of feminine pronouns here, but then the transition from singular pronouns I, her, him to a plural third person there suggests something different about the the night party, right? Of young fellows, where the rest of the poem seems to be thinking about the day and how during the day folks are kind of in their own worlds, so to speak, singing their own songs or their own version of a song. And Whitman, as the poet, can imagine those songs as America singing, but each individual singer doesn't necessarily hear what Whitman hears until maybe the night. The night being the imagined space where people aren't working, where they come together, where we have a different version of America that isn't, this is Whitman's America, that isn't predicated on just a strict individualism, um, kind of strict separation among and between people, each looking out for themselves, but rather a different sense of being together, of collectivity, of friendliness, of those songs finally coming together in one scene as opposed to a bunch of separate ones. Okay. So that's some bean counting, but that bean counting potentially kind of gets us to think about some of the later steps in the process of slowly getting to know a poem. I feel like I've talked a bit about sound and sense already. As you'll recall from my introductory videos, reading the poem out loud and thinking about these beans uh, it sets the scene for these later pieces and is a kind of low stakes way to start developing some ideas or observations about sound and sense, which I feel like we've already done. We haven't really thought about form and figure. I think one thing to maybe point out here is the poem does not, at least at first, appear to use much figurative language at all, aside from the figure of the song. So the poem has a kind of master figure that is the song, the carol. And so, even though, of course, many people might whistle while they work, I'm not so sure that what Whitman is describing is literally people while they work singing songs, but rather it's the cacophony, it's the sound of the work itself, the day itself as it plays out, that Whitman is asking us to hear as a song, as in some sense the poetry of everyday life, right? And that seems to be what's kind of going on here. Ideas and questions. I mean, one big question I have, if there is irony in the poem, the last lines pressuring our understanding of the inventory of the day, what do we make of that pressure? What relationship are we asked to imagine between, say, the enterprising individual and the friendly collective or community? Just a question, and one that does seem very, maybe, American in some ways. This makes me think that a sort of formal question, formal observation, um, formal note, the relation between the night and the workday. Remember, so when I think about form, I'm sometimes thinking not just about if a poem is a sonnet or a villanelle or something, and maybe not even about its shape or arrangement, but specifically about the relationship of the parts to each other, and not just that they are in a relationship, but that they're in a relationship where they affect, each part affects how the other parts signify, how they mean and make meaning, right? That the meaning making of a poem involves us thinking about those not just interlocking parts, because that makes it sound like it's a puzzle that isn't alive, but but that these parts are dynamic and they interact as we read the poem, right? So what sense do we make of that night and how it then pressures our understanding of this inventory of the day? I mean, I also have a question. What's missing from Whitman's inventory, right? What's missing from Whitman's inventory? There are, of course, I mean, it is, of course, interesting that the only people named in his poem are people who are working, who are laboring. And so people who may be unemployed, people who may be um, addicted, addicted to one thing or another, people who are down on their luck, who are poor, um, folks who are descendants of the formerly enslaved, or people who may be part of indigenous communities, um, women who want to do something other than be a mother or or sew or wash. It's a little unclear how what work signifies here for Whitman, so that's also something I'm curious about. And I want to be really clear, this isn't me like picking on Walt Whitman. It's me having worked through the details of this poem and coming out the other side, sort of wondering, in a poem that seems to aspire to a kind of grand vision that's both social and potentially political, that there are some stakes here with respect to people who don't find themselves named or imagined, right? But then again, maybe this poem exists in relationship to other poems of Whitman's, in whatever collection this was originally published in. Leaves of Grass, of course. Um, and maybe that would be where to start thinking about how we might answer that. Okay, I think I'm going to leave that there, leave contexts and looking again for maybe another time. Maybe not. Maybe not. We'll see. But it's been interesting coming back to Whitman. It's been some time. And thank you for spending time with me on July 4th on Independence Day with this canonical poem, I Hear America Singing, and I hope the process here worked for you. What do you think of Whitman? What do you think of this poem? Feel free to write a comment. Be sure to like, subscribe, and I hope we get to read more poems tomorrow.